Welcome everybody. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, June 4th, 2020 Watertown City Plan Commission meeting. Need a roll call?
Hanson,
Here.
Dolly,
Here.
Dargis Johnson. Absent. Stein is absent. Ford?
Stein, I'm on, Brandy.
Oh,
This
okay.
is Stein.
Sorry. Okay, good deal. Thanks, Mark. Ford?
Here.
Culhane?
Here.
Aletsky? Is absent. Brink?
Here.
And Kays is absent. So just to recap then, so Dargis Johnson and Kays are absent. And we have a quorum.
Thank you, Brandy.
And, and Aletsky. I'm sorry.
Item 3 on the agenda is invitation for public comment participants. We'll have a spot in the agenda later on for to speak to the board on anything that's not on the agenda tonight. Item 4 is the approval of the agenda, and I believe we have a modification.
Yep, so we will be removing item A, and that is the vacation for the portion of alley abutting the County Fair Banquet Hall. So that will be removed. And then also just to note, and I don't know if anybody on YouTube, if they didn't get the notification of the participation ID, if they're wanting to call in for anything, the number that's posted on the agenda is changed, and I'll just read that. Okay, and then it'll also be in the comments. Oh. Okay. Where was that one now? Okay, so the new number is 3, so you'll call in 605-305-4355, and then the conference ID number is 376-218-422.
Okay, thank you, Brandy. So with that modification of the agenda, I will need a motion to approve a modified agenda.
Make a motion to approve the modified agenda.
I have a motion by Jason,
Second, Culhane.
and a second by Liam. Any additional discussion on the agenda? We'll take a vote.
Hanson,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yep.
Stein,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Culhane,
Yes.
Brink.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the regular agenda then, we'll move right into item B, which is Resolution 2020-26 for a plat in River Ridge.
Yep, thank you, Blake. So this is commission consideration of resolution number 2020-26, approving the plat of River Ridge Estates 7th edition. This, you'll know, we approved the preliminary plan for this area in 2019. We recently just rezoned it from ag to R1, which is what this is a single-family development, a single-family residential development. The park dedication will meet all of the requirements. It was approved by the park board on June 27th of 2019, and that includes 8.4 acres of land. And then there's also a detention pond that upon construction and once it's inspected, and the city then would take that over as we do with residential detention ponds. But that detention pond was not a part of the land dedication for it to meet the park requirements. And then also, I'll pull up the development agreement here because that was not a part of the agenda. And Plan Commission doesn't have to approve it, but we always just we bring it with the plat just as a courtesy if there's anything that's caught. So I apologize that it's being presented a little last minute, but I'll go through the details. And it's our standard language, obviously the street and utilities, all of that public infrastructure will be installed per usual. Hopefully this works. And then the main thing is we just wanted to, so in the plat, there is a easement to the east of it. I'll pull it up here. All right, so here we have the park that's being dedicated. This is not necessary to install the street at this time, so they are giving an access easement so people are able to get to the park. We do have language in there though, and that's where, I'll pull that up now, where a 66-foot wide ingress and egress easement adjacent to the park shall be dedicated to the public by the plat to allow for access with a temporary turnaround, which will be gravel. The ingress and egress easement shall be dedicated as public right-of-way and constructed to city standards contemporaneous to development to the west or north that warrants connection through that portion of Cheyenne Lane, or if the park is developed and warrants Cheyenne Land be extended. The installation of Cheyenne Land will be determined by the city engineer and recommended to the city council for approval. So basically, we wanted to make sure that, say the development never happens to the east, and that, because his next phase will include that area. I'll pull up that plat to talk through that. So his next phase is this area over here. So at that time, then he will have to extend that street. But just in case that wouldn't happen for some reason, then we just wanted to have language in there. So if this park, if the Park and Rec were able to develop it, and say they needed on-street parking or whatnot, that we still had that leverage, at least in the agreement, that we could act on that if it was necessary. Any questions?
And so the park that we're seeing was the same as it was in the preliminary plan that we've discussed earlier, no changes to that?
Right.
And the trigger for that dedication is this plat here today?
Yep. Yep, so that is actually, on here you'll see that it's dedicated to the city by this plat in River Ridge Park. So that's a good one to get finalized after a lot of discussion.
Yeah, for sure.
Brandy, this is Jeff Brain. When you were reading the description, you said it was a 66-foot turnaround that'll be gravel, but it doesn't actually say that it'll be gravel. Is that language that should be added, or?
That is already included. That's up with the streets section of the development agreement.
Sounds good. So this plat, if it wasn't for the right-of-way and number of lots, would it be able to be approved administratively?
No, this plat you mean? This one, because of the right-of-way, obviously kicks it into having to go through the process. And then also you can only have up to 5 plats for a administrative plat. So, and this one has 17 R1 lots.
I see in the agreement the maintenance of the gravel streets under development, that the developer will provide snow removal. That includes this turnaround by the park area.
You know, I don't know if how the street department handles that. They might actually just use them to turn around if they are clearing those.
Because the city street already extends partially towards the park, right? So they're
Right.
going to be clearing that, the city will be.
At least have something to turn around on and have the gravel base.
I think we can leave that to their discretion anyway. And
Yeah, so it's, Cheyenne Lane is already extended to that point.
right,
And then so we'll have the gravel turnaround just so then, you know, if people want to utilize that land. And then whenever the park department is ready, the Park and Rec department is ready to develop it, then we'll address it at that time. But I think they were a couple years out on that. So instead of having him extend that part of the street when it's not necessary at this time, to just address it when it comes up.
makes sense.
And he's
Mr.
not,
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Just to clarify that question there in regards to the maintenance of gravel streets under development, the intent of that section is that's kind of cookie cutter language for all of our subdivisions, so that when the development builds out the public streets, we do require them go through the freeze-thaw cycle before they put the top lift of paving on. So when the development ends up going into the fall and winter months with just base course down, that's specifically what that section of that development agreement is pertaining to. And that's in part B1, Brandy, if you're scrolling there looking for it. I think that's the language that you're referring to, Commissioner.
Yeah, it was. Thank you for the clarification on that.
But to add clarity to your point, I think it might be fitting if we as a city want the developer to maintain this gravel access or turnaround area for the park, we should explicitly say that up in that section of the development agreement.
Mr. Chairman, this is Sarah Karen. I would like to request permission to speak.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that in our zoning ordinance, section 21.6201 says that all lots created must front on a public street or on an approved private street. And the park, nobody's ever going to build a house on it, but it is a lot being platted, and it does not abut on any approved public or private street. So there's an inherent variance in this if it's not platted as a street. And I'm a little bit concerned about having platting the land. It then becomes the city's ownership, and the developer is responsible for building the road adjacent to all of the lots. And then if nobody ever develops out there, that will become the taxpayer's responsibility as the abutting property owner to pay for the improvement of the road there. So the way we've handled this in other developments where they didn't want to develop both sides of the road, they build what we used to have in our standards was a half road, which was actually more than a half road. They put the curb and the gutter on the one side and half of the asphalt plus 2 extra feet of asphalt, so that, and it would all be sloped. And with the understanding that 2 feet beyond the center line would probably be removed, and a straight edge formed for the other half of the street when the other half of the road is developed in the future. But then it takes away any confusion whatsoever in the future of who has to pay for that road. Plus, it provides a place for people to park when they visit this public property instead of parking next to somebody else's house.
So, my thought with that was just because we're not dedicating as public right-of-way, so somebody would have to, in the future, come in and dedicate that and then build the street, and that would be part of their development agreement. The point about the park and that not abutting a public street is it's actually exempt from the regulations because it's being platted to be conveyed to a government entity.
We have confusion about this sort of thing, though, that we've done in the past, and then the road doesn't get improved, and then it's the adjacent property owners normally that are responsible to pay for the road. And so that could be confusing in the future if that road isn't improved, and then the property develops and they do it by petition. It would be the adjacent property owners, one of which is the city. So it would be potentially shifting the responsibility to the taxpayers. Just to make that clear, I mean, the Plan Commission can recommend whatever they like, but I have had this conversation with a couple of council members, and so they have to ultimately approve the plat, and this could become an issue at the city council meeting, and just don't want to. They want to support what the Plan Commission does, but I just want to make sure that the Plan Commission understands the normal process And if you're deviating from it, you're doing it knowingly.
Yeah, and the instance with the half street, how does that compare, in your opinion, with the usability of a turnaround versus just having a half street, since that doesn't have another egress to it?
The half street would not eliminate the need for a turnaround. The turnaround is because it's a dead end. It's still a dead end.
Yeah.
So that you'd have to do a turnaround somewhere in there.
I think that the turnaround would essentially get shifted from where it's proposed on this plat drawing that Brandy has up and put towards the end of that 66-foot straight run of right-of-way. Yeah, in my opinion, that'd be the appropriate thing to do if we were to pursue a half-street type of configuration.
I have a general question on policy and how it applies in these kind of cases. In regards to sidewalk installation in land that's becoming dedicated park to the city, is it exempted because it's a park, or should the expectation be that sidewalk gets installed when it's
Well,
conveyed?
They would,
Sidewalk is required normally as a requirement for development. It's part of the improvements, and it's typically deferred until a building permit is issued. And since there will never be a building permit on this land, it should go in with the street. But again, that's something that's caused a problem in the past because the developers aren't going to come back later and put the sidewalk in, and they transfer that responsibility, which is a subdivision responsibility, onto the taxpayers.
and I think it's something too, when they plat that right of way, that we could include that in that development agreement, that they would be required to put in the sidewalk and not defer it.
Yeah, it is, something that I've noticed over the years and have trouble with is the fact that, we end up with, these parks and then no pedestrian way to get there in many cases. I know we've talked about it a few years now in relation to Lions Park, which is a great park in the middle of town for people to get to, and there's no safe sidewalk. It's all walking on the road in order to get there. That's not something I think we should continue to perpetuate down the road. I do think it's an area where we need to take a more proactive approach to the way we're doing those dedications and when that's happening.
This is Diana Ford. I would only say that I agree with you, Blake. I think deferring things only is asking for confusion and down the road. And I think the less that we can defer, the better off we serve the public and the taxpayers.
So I guess as a recommendation then to bring forward to the city council, because ultimately they'll approve the development agreement. I know we just had a different situation about extending a street that did not lead to anything. So and just the discussion where that discussion led, it will be interesting how they do want to handle this type of thing and kind of have a policy going forward. Because I think where, extending the street, say that it never develops, we're still going to have an easement there. We can still get to the park. But we might never need that entire 200-foot stretch, I think. So I think it's, and we'll have to perpetually maintain it. It's expensive to put in the upfront for the developer, and let alone he's dedicating 8.4 acres of parkland to us. And then to have that, and trying to look out for taxpayers too, but I think that we still, we could create a parking lot, or, we could use this easement and still get to the park without having to have a full road extended at this time. And it's shown in his next phase. So then at that time, the park will, or the street would go in, the sidewalk would be adjacent. Council approves the preliminary plan, or the development agreement, so they could make that explicit that the sidewalks had to go in with the street. They weren't deferring it to the city. They're platting the public right of way, so they have to build the street. The city's not engaging in that. But if it never, if that never happens, I don't think that we would want to extend the street that length.
May not need the entire length, but some minimum level of serviceability there from a public street standpoint.
Well, we would have this stub that, could turn into a driveway or,
But that easement is just that, it's just an easement, right?
Yep.
And while the preliminary plan may show that in the next phase, and we think we understand what it is based on the approved preliminary plan, as well as I that, those change sometimes. And it could radically change to where that never does get developed in the way that we expect it to. So some level of, protection for the community, I think, is appropriate as well. We've struggled with developments and this development and phasing of the park dedication and park development as well. I know we've talked a lot about that in the last few years on trying to get this up front, because parks are vital for our community, and the people that live in that area want to have the parks. It's part of the responsibility of developing the land is the park dedication and improvements. So.
And for that, and we'd want to condone, obviously, that it should be strategic for them too.
Correct. Yep.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Heath here. Brandy, to your point, that measurement is on the next couple pages of the plat there on the detailed component for that area of the plat. It's 257 feet length of that 66-foot right-of-way. Yeah, that sheet. And so, I can appreciate Brandy's comments here in wanting to try to find a balance or a happy medium of how to move forward with this, which of course is ultimately a community decision by both this board's recommendation and then ultimately the city council's action. And, one of the things we're tasked with as staff is to try to make recommendations that we feel are appropriate and necessary to sustain the development, that are appropriate for the amount of infrastructure that needs to be installed, and also to safeguard the general public as developments build out so that the homes have the appropriate public utilities and public access and things like that. The reason I'm rambling on here is because I want to share a little bit of the discussion from the developer, who I'm not sure if is online here or not, but I know they've expressed concern in building the entire road out for obvious reasons. Cost is one of them. But one thing to keep in mind that Brandy has drafted into the development agreement is the improvements being triggered by the development of the park land itself. One of the points the developer made to us as staff is that, does it make sense to build a full width road for 260 feet for a parkland that's not even developed or improved yet? And so Brandy did include language in that development agreement that could be one of the trigger points that we look at to hold the developer liable to make any improvements in this easement or future right-of-way at that point in time in the future. So I just wanted to share that note because I know that was one of the important talking points that the developer shared with us. For whatever it's worth, I figure it's worthy to be part of the discussion anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for pointing that out, Heath, and Brandy for including that. Certainly, that does seem like that is an appropriate trigger to include language for making that recommendation.
Yeah. Oh. No, I just shocked.
Sorry, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties here in the room. We still have
One thing I should add to that, if I could.
Yes, sir.
Brandy, you could maybe expand on this. we have been in communication with Terry Kelly, the Park and Rec Director, on the timeline for the improvements in that parkland. Brandy, can you speak to that? I don't recall exactly if they knew when that would happen or if they had a anticipation of when that would happen.
I think that they were, at first when we were talking to Park Board last year, they were going to prioritize this park. Now it's being pushed back, and I want to, for sure more than 2 years. So, and possibly further than that. But yeah, sorry, I couldn't elaborate much more than you, Heath.
But this requirement that's drafted into the development agreement, that the park could trigger the dedication and improvement of that road, there's no time frame on that. There's no expiration of that clause.
Mm-mm. And you know, even if it came about where we didn't need the whole 257 feet and it was just a portion or something, however the park ended up developing, I think would be telling of what we would need as far as the street improvements. But I think by the time the park is improved, he's probably going to be on his next phase and the street's going to be installed. Because he will need it to extend to the rest of his development.
Right.
But it's just kind of it's a tough situation with, we need the park dedicated with this plat. So we're not pushing that off, but now it's just trying to be understanding on where he's at with the development, what's necessary, having the proper mechanisms in place to have it installed if necessary. And then, but working with him when it will be needed.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the rate at which that development has been progressing, it's very likely that he will be moving on to the next phase in the near future. But it is something that, I mean, we got to look at holistically too and talk about this as a overall community strategy.
Right.
Is the developer online anywhere to give us his input himself?
That's I'll I don't think he even got notification that it was on here, so I'm sorry.
We don't have a public hearing on this particular action
No.
here. We're just approving the plat today, and we don't necessarily approve the development agreement, but we can weigh in on recommendation to the city council.
And you know what Heath pointed out in our discussions with the developer, he hit it spot on. Those were the concerns. As far as what his intentions are, he has shown in the preliminary plan. It is here. I'll zoom in. So you'll see here, this is phase 1, phase 2. This is also part of phase 1. He actually, and then phase 3 is this portion. So you'll see then, and that, you know, he's slating that at 2028, but phase 2 is for 2023, and he's already there. I mean, 1 was 2020. He's including 2 with this phase. So then 3 will be the next phase.
Any additional discussion from the board? Yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have, whether we need to take action on the development agreement or not. It is something that we like to look at, and I appreciate you bringing this to us. It's been good discussion. We just want to make sure that we're thinking about the future of these developments as well, and the parks we've talked extensively about over the last few years. So something that's pretty near and dear to us. We definitely don't want it to go undeveloped, and I appreciate the language that you put into the agreement to ensure that we have some triggers, some levers to pull.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, that's the nice part of it being the courtesy, is getting your guys' eyes on it. You're a big part of it. You're the ones that approved the preliminary plan. And then I think too, it gives a little direction too for council when they have to actually approve it. So, because I think that your recommendation weighs heavily, or they take that into consideration.
Is there anything that other members of the board would like to add in regards to that before we ask for a motion on the plat approval?
This is Jeff Frank. I've kind of lost one back and forth on whether we should require that road or make the suggestion that the council require that road next to the park. I mean, I understand that the cost savings, you know, for the developer and not wanting to do it to a road that leads to nowhere, but I do know that, you know, sometimes it takes longer than, you know, the phasing map shows to get developed. And if we don't put a road in there, we probably won't put a park in there. I mean, I think I'm leaning towards that we should ask the developer to put that road in now, you know, because that would help ensure that we get the sidewalk in there now. And if there's a road there, I think we're more likely as a community to put a park there. My thought. The big area that doesn't have very many parks close to it. So if we had a road and then they were able to put an actual park there, I think that would benefit this development.
We have the language in there too, though, that does say, so if we build the park and it's necessary, we could call it in. But if the streets...
Yeah, and I see that, but I don't see us building the park if the road's not there. I think that if the road's not there, we won't build the park. And I think we want a park there, so I think we should build the road that would help us get the park.
The way that language is written, to me, I was under the impression that they could coincide with each other, that if we have the budget and the money to develop the park, that could trigger that clause and that we do them simultaneously.
Right.
Is that the intention of this language here?
Yes.
Yeah, Brandy, to Commissioner Brink's point, did the Park and Rec Director indicate at all, you know, the park board's plans and whether they would be impacted on the presence of that road or not?
You know, I don't think it was contemplated, but I think that, I mean, we know that this land is dedicated. They have it slated when they would develop it. They're putting money toward it. So then when they were ready to do the project, and if they felt that the street being extended was necessary, then we could call it in. But, you know, I don't know what they are proposing for this park, but it might not need the full extent of the road. It might. But what would be unfortunate is that if the park's dedicated, the street is put in, and then we maintained it for 3 years and it wasn't necessary at all, and the park was never developed. I mean, that's just another way to look at it.
I guess the other aspect,
Well,
to it, you know, that we mentioned earlier was the installation of the sidewalks as well, which would typically go with the street. And if there wasn't a street, yeah, I don't know.
Well, and we could have
It all kind of hinges upon, you know, the park being usable too, because if it's just a field, it's not entirely useful.
and we could, you know, the sidewalk's not as much as the street. If that was wanted, you know, we could maybe look at that, of having the sidewalk extended along that access easement for this development, if you feel like that would, you know, lead people there and let them know that it was accessible.
Part 7C, Brandy, of that development agreement does require that all properties intended to be dedicated to the public for public use, such as a park, shall have sidewalk installed by the developer.
Well, there we
It
go.
just doesn't, that section doesn't contemplate whether or not a road exists, I guess, is the only nuance there.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to point out. That at least, I mean, that's there, so.
Yeah, and at least if the sidewalk went in, no, I think, you know, then we would get that. I fear that if it doesn't happen now, it'll get lost and forgotten about.
But we always review, I mean, when we look back on a development, it's customary to always look at the development agreement. It's recorded, it runs with the land.
Is sidewalk installed on that adjacent property?
Yeah, to Cheyenne Lane.
So if we had this sidewalk at least extend through the park, it would be done in advance, and, you know, from a walkability standpoint, it would be there, regardless of when the street goes in.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that, Mr. Brink?
Yeah, I would like to see the sidewalk going right away. Cause then at least we can walk to it, and then it helps people know that it is a park, and I think that's a good step forward.
Is that a recommendation the rest of the board agrees with?
Yes.
I can agree with that.
Okay. Anything else that we need to discuss on the development agreement before we take a vote on the plat? Ask for a motion for approval of the plat. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the plat.
A motion by Mr. Brink. Is there a second?
Mr. Brink, was that with that addition of the sidewalk to be completed at this time?
Well, that's, wouldn't that be in the development agreement?
Yeah, so we're
necessarily
not-
the plat?
We're not taking a vote on the development agreement, but
Yeah,
we
so-
consider
so
that
I'm
as a
just-
general recommendation to the city council, who will be reviewing the development agreement and acting upon it.
Correct. I've made a motion to approve the plat as presented with, you know, and I do hope that, you know, staff take that recommendation to the city council, but what I'm actually putting my motion on is to approve the plat as presented.
And I'm quite sure that the city council members will be watching this and reviewing our comments as well, and hope that they take that into consideration. So we have a motion, and we'll look for a second. Do you have a second?
I'll second Culhane.
Motion and a second by Culhane. We'll go ahead and take a vote.
Hanson,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes?
Stein,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Culhane,
Yes.
Kays. Oh,
Case is absent.
Brink.
Yeah.
Jeez, Todd's awfully quiet.
Motion passes. Thank you. Item 6 is open public comments. Is there anybody on the line to speak on something that wasn't on the agenda today? Anybody? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 7 is new business.
Okay, so this is discussion on the extent of notice to adjacent landowners for conditional uses and planning items and variances for that matter. So right now in state statute, well, we kind of have a discrepancy with just of what the policy should be. And then once we get your input, we'll get it in ordinance, so it's just straightforward. So for public notice, obviously we have to send the notice to the paper 10 days, at least 10 days, no more than 20, before a public hearing for these types of items. And then other than that, it contemplates like putting a sign on the property, letting everybody know that would drive by, adjacent landowners, neighbors, that there was something going on with that property. If it was being rezoned, petition to rezone, or whatnot, anything, conditional use. So that is actually in state statute. So if that's something we want to contemplate on adding to our ordinance, we can. That's a side note. But otherwise, there's nothing that says that you have to send certified mailings to any distance. How I've been doing mine by policy is we send certified mailings to landowners within 250 feet of the property and just the legal description of what we're acting on. And then how for Jill's items, then it's actually in ordinance, and it's not. How can I pull this up?
To be more specific there, Brandy, for BOA actions you're referring to, correct?
Yeah. That's just Jill. Okay, I'm trying to pull up my ordinance. Why isn't it my ordinance book I had up? So then, okay. So any of the planning items is not specifically in ordinance. Now the BOA items are. So it says notice shall also be given to all adjacent landowners by certified mail of the applicant's request for a variance. Land immediately across streets or road right-of-way shall be considered adjacent. The certified letter should give the details of the applicant's request, the date and time, all of that. And then at least 5 days before the hearing, the certified mail receipt shall be filed with the Board of Adjustment as proof of compliance. So now adjacent is a little arbitrary too. So we have a couple different things to establish. Do we want, instead of having it say adjacent, do we want to say a certain distance? Because, you know, we want to have a clear boundary for when somebody would call and say, well, I didn't get noticed, and if they would be considered adjacent. It'd be easy to just say, like how I've handled with any of mine, it was just saying, well, it's within 250 feet of the property. Now, where 250 feet comes from is state statute too, that they can actually petition a referendum if they don't agree with something that is passed. But only the people within 250 feet, assuming that those people are impacted or aggrieved by it.
And that's 250 feet equidistant from any area on the boundary of their property.
Yeah. Yep, so if any part of it touches, then they would be notified. So there's that to contemplate. And then do we send notice to the adjacent landowners of the parent parcel, or just the actual legal description that's being petitioned for? So say that for a real life example, Compesca Dunes. So we had a rezone on just that southeast portion, but he owns that entire lot A. And I sent notice just to 250, to the landowners within 250 feet of just that southeast corner that was being rezoned. Or do you guys, or do we look at it as the entire property that he owns? So something to think about there. And then the third thought is if we want to send certified mailings, or if we just want to say first class mail, because certified mailings are expensive and tedious. The only thing that's nice about them is that you get the receipt, but it's not a state law that they have to be certified. So do we just send first class mail? And then it's also saving the time of the admin assistants of not having to, record the receipts and match everything up. I've never been a part of that, so I don't know how tedious that gets, but as far as sending them, it's time consuming.
So, Brandy, if I could chime in?
Yep.
To kind of give the board some decisive context here, really the three, correct me if I'm wrong, really the three main actions we're referring to are a conditional use or variance that the BOA might act on. And then the third one would be a rezone that the planning commission would act on, more or less. Is that accurate?
Yep.
And so it might be fitting that those things get looked at differently, because really that's how it's set up now. The BOA action, as Brandy has highlighted here, is specific to send a certified letter to every adjacent landowner that BOA action will be considering. And on the planning side, when a rezone comes through, we're really just relying on state statute there that any action, anybody within 250 feet of that rezone action can refer that action that the council has made. So that's what we're trying to kind of reconcile here. Maybe they do stay two separate protocols. Maybe we can make one uniform protocol for all three of these actions. But that's the discussion we wanted to have with you guys and with the board and see what feels appropriate for our community. Because like Brandy cited, what we want to be is consistent. We don't want to have a case come through and staff is subjectively deciding who gets notices, and then something gets challenged later on, and of course that puts everybody in a difficult situation. So that's what we're trying to avoid. We want to be consistent, and we want to provide enough notice to the adjacent landowners as is appropriate, these actions.
Chair,
Yes, sir.
it's Liam. I'd kind of like to get our attorney's take on this. Matt, what are your opinions on notice, distance, certified, uncertified?
Well, I think that, generally the more notice we provide, I think the better. But I just think we need to be consistent. I guess that's my bottom line, is we need to be consistent with how we apply it, however that comes down. If I understand correctly, our ordinance only requires certified mail for variances. That's correct, Brandy?
And conditional uses. I just have the variance one highlighted. Here's the.
Yeah, both variances and conditional uses require certified mailing according to our city ordinance, but not according to state statute, correct, Brandy? The state statute does or does not require that?
Does not, and the only thing that contemplates is that putting that actual physical sign on the property.
So that is a good point, to whether to continue those certified mailings or do first-class mailings. But right now, it's required certified for both conditional use and variances.
Right.
Right.
And currently, by practice, they're sending certified letters for all planning commission items as well, correct?
I send them for preliminary plans, rezones, and annexations and zonings. And, because we want to be transparent, we want to make sure that we're getting the people that could feel or could be affected by such a change. And that's what Heath and Matt said, just to have something consistent for every action.
So in regards to the adjacency right here, if we went to a rule that was just 250 feet, would that mean that we'd be informing more people potentially? Because it wouldn't be limited to just adjacent?
Potentially.
Yes, actually a point that Jill made, because she handles these BOA cases. And, you know, you would be extending that in some cases, maybe quite extensively compared to what the adjacent language says. And here's where, here's where it becomes a little bit unique, because sometimes we end up with kind of an island of land that doesn't really have anything adjacent to it. So the
Right.
250 becomes a lot more fitting.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen those cases too, where there's either, you know, some ag land or maybe some city land that's immediately adjacent to it, that if you just went by those qualifications, the landowners, which are really pretty close to the subject parcel, wouldn't meet the criteria. And those are definitely the kind of cases where, you know, we don't want to, you know, abstain from giving them notice, and so I guess I'm leaning towards just a universal 250 feet being more appropriate across the board. It seems more applicable from a general standpoint, and if we could be consistent.
And then the other point to that is, if somebody owns a whole quarter section, now this might eliminate notice too, because so say somebody owns the entire quarter section, that we would send notice to all of those adjacent landowners, or do we just go by what is being petitioned, like what the legal description of the application is? Because, and that's where I think that we should
Well,
go from the actual specific property.
Yeah, I agree. The action is on the property in question, and so you're talking about those people that are affected by it. Well, they're affected by what's the subject of the action. If I own, you know, an entire section and I'm only looking at one small corner of it, somebody that's on the opposite side isn't as affected by that action, right?
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And
And then I guess the last question you had on the certified versus first class, I mean, I don't see the reason why we have to have certified if it's not part of state or legal statute that we need to do that.
Mr. Chair, if I may interject here. I think that if we were to place a sign on the property, as was also mentioned, and give some thought to that, some communities stake each corner and put a sign so that people know exactly what area we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that doing just regular mail, first class mail, not certified, would actually inform many more people in the area.
Yeah, I've seen communities that have done that, the staking and the signage, and it really does help inform people. I mean, people get a lot of junk mail, you know, and even a certified letter, you might not pay too much attention to it. So,
well, and that's where you're getting like people that aren't within 250 feet, but say that they're interested in a specific property and what's happening with it. I mean, then they're notified that there's something going on with that, so they could be a part of the meeting.
right.
So I do like that. And we could include language like that if you guys were on board too. Like, we'll come back with an amendment, and then, so whatever's decided, then we'll have that come before you guys again.
Yeah, I think so. It's a good idea to try to get more consistent across the board and tighten up the language, especially if we're doing stuff. So you seem to be kind of going above and beyond what our ordinance requires, right? Well, let's if that's what we're going to do, you know, let's put it into the ordinance then.
Mm-hmm.
And this would include the Plan Commission also, not just the Board of Adjustment,
Rezoning,
rezoning.
on the Plan Commission.
Anything else on the Plan Commission besides rezoning, or just rezoning?
Well, in state statute, they only consider the rezone, but just by practice, I send notice for annexation and zonings and preliminary plans, which and then rezones, of course. But I think we can continue doing that, but I would add the language actually in the ordinance, so it wasn't just,
Yeah, if we're going to
practice.
continue the practice, I think it should be in the ordinance, so it's something that, you know, we're doing for sure, and we're doing a specific way, and it's documented.
and those are the items, Diana, that have public hearings, that get the notice.
Okay. I always just think the more we can communicate with the public, the better off we are. I really like the idea of the sign that Joe brought back up again.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and I have been impressed when I've been in other cities and seen that, because it does a really good job of notifying those in that area that something's going on.
Well, and it's
kind of
even
a
like going, it's interesting
Yeah,
too.
it's a constant reminder too. But you know, I'll be in, you know, I mean, Nashville, I think, you know, had the signage policy, and you know, just kind of being around planning and everything, I kind of nerd out about that anyway. But it's just interesting to be able to see that and see what development they're doing, and you know, kind of the way that they're taking their communities. It's a good idea.
So you're talking about a signage policy just for conditional uses, or rezones, or variances, or all of the above?
I think state statute just talks on about rezones and conditional uses.
I would,
Only conditional use.
Just conditional use?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I think that if we would require it for all of the planning items too, I think that might be a little much.
yeah, I was gonna heed caution to that too, Brandy. Just from a staffing workload standpoint, I'd wanna be careful on how, expansive we get with that requirement. But I do agree that there's a fitting place for it, if not only for the conditional uses, maybe for conditional uses and zoning. But I wouldn't wanna get too expansive, just out of concern for the workload that would create for
Yeah,
the staff to have available to perform that.
yeah, and I'd agree. I don't think it needs to be part of every action, but yeah, look at
And-
that recommendation.
The conditional use is nice too, because that's like, I mean, you're changing the use of the property.
Right.
So, and then usually they're smaller scale where it would be easy for somebody to stake it and put a sign there. I mean, but if you get an annexation and zoning, you might get a whole quarter section. So,
I think,
That's the other piece I was going to point out, is that if we're gonna amend the ordinance to 250 feet rather than adjacent, you know, you could have a scenario where nobody gets noticed because the landowner owns a huge chunk of land, and 250 feet from the affected portion of that land still is the landowner's property, therefore no adjacent landowners either.
And maybe it's either or, whichever produces the most notification, or something like that.
That might, yeah, that could work, yeah.
but I don't know, I think that gets arbitrary again. I think that we would just want it one way.
I agree with you, Brandy. I think doing an either or will cause confusion with the public, and people could easily become upset and expect those things, expect those signs because they've seen them other places, and then think nothing is happening if they don't see a sign.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but what I mean by that would be, it would be an objective determination as to the number of notices that would be going out. If you go adjacent and that produces 10 notices, 10 adjacent landowners, versus 250 feet that maybe produces 15 notices going out, we would then objectively choose the 15 and use that as an objective determination.
As long as it doesn't explode the workload, I don't know if it makes it geometrically more difficult to determine that either or, but I kind of like that. Either adjacent landowners or 250 feet, whichever produces more notifications or whichever is greater.
And then if you remove and then if you go ahead and remove the certified mailing requirement, which is
Mm-hmm.
which is well above and beyond state law. Perhaps the a couple additional notices that might go out under that either or scenario, the time required would be made up if we don't do certified mailing.
Right. And I'll just show you guys here. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
I can see it.
And so this just picked out a property for no reason. So, and also I think that we have this tool where you just select by location and then you can expand your distance 250 feet. Right now in the ordinance, we have where we exclude public right-of-ways. And so we take that out of the adjacent, what would be adjacent. I think that gets a little difficult, I guess, or just more time consuming to then have to go and, well, why didn't that work? Select by location.
While you're doing that, Brandy, I think both Board of Adjustment type of hearings, conditional use and appeal, it would be useful to put the onus on the applicant to post a sign, at least, maybe not stake out, but at least post a sign on the property. I know this is what we talk about when we go to conferences and things, that appeals, there's sometimes an affected landowner that's a couple spaces down that didn't get notified that appeals matter to them too, variances, and then do away with the certified mailings, so cut down on staff time there. But it would just be a matter of providing the applicant a sign, and they must put it up for the term.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's pretty neat, Brandy. I'm just watching this.
After the third try. So that came from 319. So it did include the street in that area, but I don't think that we would want to exclude them just because it really, why is that up? It really it creates it for you.
Yeah, and the reason for excluding it before when we're talking adjacency is because you don't want to consider the street the adjacent property, right? And then you're not notifying the people across the street.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
That's.
Yeah, you see that's substantially more than if we just went adjacent to that one parcel.
Mm-hmm. And then, when you look at a certified mailing, that's about $7 for one. So now at least we're going 50 cents. So we're cutting down on that expense, because otherwise, this is what I would send out for if they were rezoning this property, then they would be responsible. And I'll pull up how many this actually is.
Just curious, is Jill available in the conference room down there? I wouldn't mind hearing her thoughts on this, because as we've mentioned here, the BOA cases have been adjacent in the past, and this is one example. We're probably producing an additional dozen mailings, maybe, as opposed to the adjacent. I just, if Jill's around, I wouldn't mind hearing her thoughts on this too.
Yeah, thanks, Heath. I think that doing regular mailings versus certified mailings, even though there's more, it's just a matter of slapping a label on an envelope, stuffing it, and throwing it in the, to mail bin. Whereas the certified mailings, which are definitely fewer, that's, you have to write on those green cards, you have to, separate pages and paste something on, and then they come back and you have to match them up. And this would be, even though there's more, a lot less work.
Yeah, so like this is 35 properties then who would all get notice, which again, they could refer it if they were against what happened. So to at least notify them what is happening, I think is nice. And then just the cost of a certified mailing, now that would be $245 extra. that the applicant would pay rather than whatever, like $17 for.
Yeah. And with the 250, I mean, it's so much simpler to explain and it's consistent, right? I mean, there's been so many times where people are confused by the adjacency thing. I mean, not understanding what's adjacent and with the, public right of way and everything. This would just clarify it.
If we go with 250, just for the sake of how Brandy's been calculating it, I assume, Brandy, we can modify this to exclude that right away, but that's maybe a talking point we'd want to determine. If we're expanding it to 250, are we okay in keeping the right of way as part of that 250? Or do we still want to keep that right of way excluded? That'd be a good point to settle on too.
Yeah, I don't think we'd need to exclude it if we're going to 250, because, part of the reason for excluding it before was with the adjacency to make sure you get those people across the street or across the public right away. Yeah, yep. So I think just a straight 250, no exclusions.
And then, so we'll go first 250, first class mail from the legal description of the application.
Yeah.
And
Or adjacent, whichever
Oh,
produces.
yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry. So 250 or adjacent, whichever is greater. And then the sign, do we want to have that be a requirement for conditional uses like state statute?
So I was just gonna chime in there that it's not really our choice. It actually is required by state statute, for conditional uses. We can go ahead and require for more than that, but, we just haven't been doing it. And really, the statute says landowner, so I would say that we haven't done necessarily anything inconsistent with statute. It truly is the landowner's responsibility to go talk to somebody like Liam and have them tell the landowner that they're required to put a sign up. But regardless, we should take it upon ourselves to inform them that they should be putting a sign up. And then I guess the board should discuss whether we want to include more than just conditional uses.
And can we provide a standard template for what that signage needs to be?
Or could we even maybe have some signs that when they give the application, then Jill could provide them with a sign, so that's standard too, like you're not getting.
Yeah. I know the ones that I have seen before looked like they were, just a very straight standard. In fact, the ones that I've seen have been like fluorescent orange, real bright, catch your attention.
I've seen them too when I've traveled, and they've always been standard in every city that I've ever seen them in. It was the same sign, so people knew immediately what that sign was for.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of a good communication process.
Right.
I can look into
Yeah,
some
I think
other
that's a
communities.
good measure
Okay.
to have a standard sign. Actually, a small project I did at my last community, we were posting all different kinds. They were, various what they said. The language wasn't consistent. Some would be covered in plastic, and then the paper and plastic would blow away. It was kind of a mess. So we we actually had a sign shop, so we made our own signs and provided them to the applicants. Here would be a little bit different, but we could still find some kind of a consistent template to use and provide those. And of course, would request we get those back from the applicants.
Right. I think it'd be good.
Yeah, and even, because everything, like, it'll change, but we could at least, whatever it would say, conditional use, application, pending, view agenda at the website, and have that large enough where somebody could, read that. But then that we weren't having to change it and say, like, well, the public hearing is this day and this time. But also, we'll look at the state statute, which I think Matt has looked at, and we can just be consistent with whatever
Right.
that.
I want to clarify something real quick here. I forgot this was a goofy statute. So it actually says that a sign is only required if we decide to require it, and if we decide to require it, then it must be 24 inches wide and 18 inches tall, with bold lettering to inform the public about commission and hearing. So it's kind of weird. It says that it's required if we require it, but then it puts conditions on what it has to be in the event that we require it, and it's kind of confusing. But regardless, if you want to have a sign requirement, you should.
Yeah, and then Matt, as far as that language on what the sign needs to be, would you recommend we include that language into our ordinance as well?
Yes.
Well, that explanation kind of helps clarify, Matt, on maybe why we haven't been doing that and following statute, that we have the option not to require that.
Yeah, it could be. It was only added as a statute back in 2016, and so I'm not. It seems odd that they put that in there because they're basically saying, essentially what they're saying is if there's a local ordinance, you have to follow it, which is true anyway. But apparently they wanted to dictate that if there's a local ordinance, here's what the sign has to look like and the size it should be. So anyway.
All
So
right.
is that something that we'd like to implement for conditional uses then?
Yeah, I think I'd like to see it.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, I guess the question is, do we only want to do it on conditional uses, or do we look at all BOA actions, so that would include variance requests?
Personally, I would like to see it because I think it's good communication with the public.
Yeah, I think I would look at, BOA as a whole and treat them the same way.
Sounds good. So I'll include all of that language we discussed here in an ordinance amendment, and then it'll come before you again so we can make sure that we got everything. Just to reiterate then, it'll be 250 feet or to adjacent landowners, whichever is greater, sent by first-class mail. We'll add the language for the signs for conditional uses and variances, and then the notice will go to the adjacent landowners or the within the 250 feet for the legal description of the application and not the entire parcel that the applicant owns.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. That covers new
Sounds
business.
good.
Any other new business?
None that I have.
Any old business?
Nope.
No need for executive session?
Nope.
Take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a motion
Ford second.
and a second. We'll take a roll call vote.
Hanson.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes?
Stein.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Culhane.
Yes.
Brink.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.